For this bill.
Yeah.
All right, you want to say, to speak against it. Well, we're ready?
Yeah.
Are we live? Great, thank you. Welcome back to Senate Education, Thursday, April 14th. Our final work today is on additional testimony on H727. Mr. Loiters, you want to join us at the table? Yes, sir. And are you you and Jeannie going to share time, you and Ms. Albert, or how do you want to do that?
So
I don't see her there.
She just called me. I presume she's just pulling in now from Montpelier. She drove over from Lincoln.
Okay,
And I just came in from Barry.
Okay.
For the record, Tim Leaders-Dumont, I'm just appearing in my individual capacity.
sure.
And I think some of her testimony was sort of tail off, and she actually has some handouts that my dear mother printed off and handed to her because they're neighbors. So she'll probably pass those along. Those are the packets that I had sent along to Daphne. And they're really, I'm not going to go through them. I think they're helpful resources if you're interested in sort of navigating the bill from the perspective of the Lincoln folks. And I'll just give you a brief overview.
Yeah, maybe take us back to how you got to this point.
Yeah.
How even being here, because you live in Montpelier.
I do.
Okay.
During stretches of the pandemic, when I was in law school, I spent some time in Lincoln, as everyone was remote. But I'll give some background context for myself. I'll talk specifically a little bit about the carve-outs, so-called carve-outs, which are really more like add-ons in this bill. I'll talk just briefly about Act 46. I'll talk just briefly about some of the origins and process for this very large bill. And then I'll talk about some of the anti-democratic measures that kind of brought me in here. Talk a little bit about mindset, and then right at the end, I'll give you an opportunity to weigh whether or not you think the bill is fixable. So the introduction is really, I'm really deeply thankful to the chair. I think, a lot of committees, they get emails, they get calls from people they know, and they just kind of let that pass until after the bill's been contemplated and say, I tried my best. You guys are really taking a very measured approach, and you're the sibling to the House, which is what you're supposed to be doing. So thank you for being prudent. I grew up in Lincoln. At the time, there's about 100 students at the elementary school. Remained fairly consistent for about 30 years. Pandemic changed things a little bit, but it's still very, very consistent for my entire life. I was raised in Lincoln, went to Mount Abraham Union High School, just down the road in Bristol. And I'm not affiliated, probably to their benefit, to Lincoln and Starksville Save the Community Schools organizations.
Okay.
I certainly support them, but I have my own perspective, and Jeannie and I talk about things, but really she has her own testimony, and we are distinct, although I do agree with everything you'll hear from her. I did work for Peter Welch for 2 years, and I worked for the treasurer for 4 years, which is where I met some of you. Some of you don't recognize me unless she's standing next to me, but I did go to law school in 2018. Now I work as a deputy state's attorney here in Washington County. So I am talking to you today because of personal experience and my absolute belief in the benefits of community elementary schools for all children and students that live in those communities. The community elementary schools are embedded in our communities. The teachers that live there often have children themselves, sustain the population. Community centers are entirely dependent in some locales of the state on schools, and they are, in my opinion, one of the most, if not the most consistent and stable pillars of the Vermont economy, which is an obsession across the street. One of the greatest drivers of young people staying here and new people arriving here is community schools, and I've seen this play out for 3 decades in Lincoln. The same could be true for many different locations, but I know it's true where I was from. So I had sent along some draft information for just your own purposes, really. So feel free to look through that and send questions if you have afterwards. But the context, Lincoln and Starksboro are focused on H727.
And I should just mention, just taking a quick look at
Absolutely.
this. And, I mean, we're not going to, jump too much into Act 40. It's
Absolutely.
passed. This is not. We're not going to debate this and reopen it. And just, we're also, just to be respectful of everybody, we have a hard stop at 4:45. So just so you know.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I've trimmed enormous sections. I've gotten good with the red ink since law school, but
Okay.
The context, like why we're here. So,
Sure.
as you know, and you heard from Herb Olson on Tuesday, Mount Abraham Union High School School District in Addison County is made up of 5 community schools. And in 2020, late 2020, during what I would describe as the height of no contact in-person behavior, the superintendent in that district did announce a very hurried and what I would describe as devastating plan to close 3 of the 5 schools. The biggest justification, and it's a story for a different day, was cost. That turned out to be not accurate, and I'm not attributing any malice, but it was not accurate. And instead of the community falling in on itself, the 5 towns actually came together and had this incredibly in-depth discussion. Ultimately, and after many months and hours and town resources, Lincoln passed the withdrawal vote with nearly 60% turnout, actually more than 60% turnout in Lincoln. 697 people turned out and voted in Lincoln, and that's massive where I'm from. 525 people approved the vote to withdraw, which of course then triggered, it should have been a shorter time window, but it eventually triggered a vote amongst the other towns. And those towns, I'll just give you a breakdown in total: 1,369 votes in favor, 413 opposed. So that is an overwhelming mandate that Lincoln should, relying on existing law, be allowed to leave and withdraw. And unlike in certain parts of the state where you would sometimes see incredible divisiveness when one of the communities wanted to withdraw, and in fact, even standing in the way, here, all the towns voted. And if not, I don't think I'd be here today with such many. Dr. Alberts is here as well, and she will speak many of the points that I'm making. She'll be able to say with sort of more of an in-depth experience because she lives in Lincoln. But the 5-town community has spoken incredibly loudly. Lincoln should be allowed to self-govern based on existing law and process. And I don't have to tell you that H727 does not make it easier for Lincoln to do what it has already expended great resources in hoping to pursue. There are 4 sections of the bill which are outlined in your materials that relate to Ripton, Stowe, Lincoln, and Starksboro. And I'm happy to supply those afterwards. But that's selective legislation. That's incredibly disfavored across the country in terms of directing statewide legislation at specific localities. My recommendation in terms of the so-called carve-outs would be to absolutely scrap them. They are, I don't think they agree with the senses of this body, and I would just urge a deep look at those. I will only talk about Act 46 for about 20 seconds. It's incorporated 12 times in the bill, and it hasn't been fully evaluated. And so poison pill is used way too often in a lot of conversations in Montpelier, but it is that, unless you fully evaluate that, incorporating it into yet another massive bill could really set you back and create more work in the future. One of the most important aspects of Act 46 was financial fiscal transparency. And I had to routinely public records threaten, or actually in one's case, public records request the local school district central office for basic budget information about closure. And they ended up giving up the information. But for me, that goes way against Act 46. You shouldn't have to ask for that. And I did it on behalf of multiple folks. I'm just often happy to be the badger digging up stuff.
So if we were to identify, as we sometimes talk about in this committee, the problem and then the solution, your issue right now with us is that 727 doesn't make it easier for districts to withdraw. That is the issue that we're here.
That's correct.
And what do you see as a solution to that?
So one of the solutions to withdrawal, I'd say you got to slow down this bill. And when I used to work in the treasurer's office, the bill was over 50 pages. Sometimes they'd say, maybe take a couple of years. This is nearly 200 pages, and it would have incredible sweep across the state with respect to folks that are already in the process, and not to mention the folks that have thought about it. Mm-hmm. But this would just eclipse any opportunity. And this leads me right in center to go to the core of the reason why I'm here today, which is the anti-democratic measures, which are thresholds. In Florida, there is a 67% threshold that they were pursuing last year because the state passed, I believe in a statewide referendum, 65% of people said people with criminal history should be able to vote in Florida. Right. State legislation, whoa, let's make it 67%.
Yeah.
And so Here, the 60% has to do not with elected individuals, with the State Board of Education saying, we're not sure you should withdraw. So in essence, the 60% is vetoing an unelected body, which is almost entirely appointed by the sitting governor. Now, you're not sure, 60%. And democracy is messy, it's not always great, but one of the things is you can't tell people to go vote. But 50% plus one is the rule, and I would urge you not to adopt the House's version.
Committee, what do others feel about that? I mean, that seems.
I totally with it.
Yeah, it's just looking.
Yeah, I just
Senator Burson,
wonder
please.
what your response is to the argument that that's the threshold for bond voting.
So one thing I would say about that is that if a local community is grappling with something, they know what's going on in that community. Sometimes there's strife there too. And certainly where I'm from, there's been lots of discussions about bonds, but I can't really speak to that. I wish I could. For me, I just think that the state legislature, the two bodies here, don't want to be in a position where you've told the voters, we don't trust you. And that's what whether you sang it or not, that's what it feels like.
Senator Oaker?
No, I agree.
Yeah, no, it seems that there's consensus there. Yes, Senator Chin, please.
If I may, you also have one of your satellite commingled votes that's come up here. Tell me why you would argue against a forced commingling of votes.
So, and Dr. Alberts, who I know wants me to call her Jeannie, can speak more to that. I think where it comes from for me is we were lucky in our 5-town area. We had a lot of turnout, huge amount of really productive discussion on Front Porch Forum and in person when we had that brief period last summer. But when a town, I'm not going to use any town names. Let's name the town, Bristol,
Right, okay.
Heights, Bristolville is able to eclipse the town of a Lincolnville, even though Lincolnville had 70% turnout.
We're a lot smarter than that. You know, we're following you,
I
right?
have no idea what you're talking about. But luckily, Bristol, in our situation, actually said, you know what, Lincoln, you put a lot of work into this. You spent your resources wisely. And we had multiple public meetings where Jeannie and my mother were down at the town hall, people asking fantastic questions. And it was totally genuine. Like let's talk about this. And that's why they got such turnout. I can't speak for the rest of the state, but it's been a huge effort. I can't even tell you. And one of the things that, I'm not just saying this in jest, State Board of Education should be required to visit every community that is in the midst of withdrawal to see what that community is doing. And I'm not just saying that in jest, I truly believe that. You guys do it all the time. Some teacher or community is like, hey, come check out what's happening. I truly think the State Board of Education, if they're going to have that level of power, should go and be required to visit and meet in person.
Senator Burson.
I don't know if you answered
So,
to the question.
and I'm sorry, the commingling, I think, falls into that. It's in that sort of category of, I don't think that you would want to be in a position where what it's saying to the voters is the individual town at the local democratic level is less important than that group. And that group, the Act 46 Unified District, for example, like in Mount Abraham, it's important, but I still think that each of the towns should have some autonomy to speak. And again, I think Dr. Albert's going to speak more to that. For me, it falls into the category of a threshold. I think you don't want to touch it. And it's probably not the answer you want, but for me, it just makes me feel uncomfortable. So the last thing I'll just note is I do think that the defense attorney that I listened to in law school, and he used it from someone else, when you bite into a candy bar and you bite into a nickel and you chip your tooth, you don't take another bite of the candy bar. And right now, this thing has some nickels in it, and I don't think it's worth continuing to gnaw at right now. I do think that the bill has some really, really deep issues. And in terms of process, this wasn't something that, one of you said, hey, let's go, let's get on this. This appears to have been largely drafted by AOE and then State Board of Education, which is fine, but it wasn't an organic committee bill in the way that I've seen you guys work through things before. And the last thing about Act 46 is, in my very informal survey of folks that were voting, they did not intend for a pretextual use of the bill to close community schools. And I know that some of the folks I've spoken to, including folks in the community that I lived in, that were involved in that process, they feel uncomfortable with how it's being used by some of the central offices that are using it, frankly. Yeah.
So short of halting, which I respect that. No, but I respect that. That's your opinion. Really, you're most concerned about that threshold. Okay, that's helpful.
And in general, I think that the carve out language, the targeted selective legislation that's telling Lincoln, Starksboro, Ripon, and I won't speak so much for Stowe because I'm the other side of the mountain in terms of what I've been paying attention to. But Ripon is already like, come on, state board, let's get going. Lincoln has voted on something. They're getting there, and Starksboro is having a vote, I believe, in next month, May, I believe. And so they're all in that process where they've expended resources, and the legislation doesn't make it easier. It doesn't say, okay, you're exempt. The rest of the state's going to have a tough time. I still think the rest of the state, in terms of the withdrawal language, is still too difficult, too cumbersome. But those carve-outs are not carve-outs. They're targeted barriers that made it more difficult with add-on more requirements. And I think that's, in the terrible land of tort law, it would be estoppel. You've relied on something to your detriment. You've expended resources, and now you're getting punished. And in tort law, you have the ability to, if you have a good claim there, you've relied to your detriment, which is what's happened here. And that those town meetings, people were asking questions. What's the existing law? How do we do this? And now it's changing potentially.
Dr. Albert, do you want to join us as well?
Sure.
Please come up together if you'd like, or if you want to switch. It's great to see you, Jeannie.
Chris, you
I'll let you take the chair.
Thank you very much, Attorney. It's great to see everybody.
Really great
So
to see you.
sorry.
Everyone know
Sorry,
Dr. Albert, who
Jeannie,
who's been involved, really deeply involved with redistricting. She, what was your role in redistricting? You were on the board.
I was on the legislative apportionment board. So that was a journey and very, very interesting experience. I was really grateful in the end to have it because it pulled together many interests I had. So
Yeah.
but it's great to be here, and I
Yeah.
apologize.
No,
did not-
no need to apologize.
I underestimated the number of hallways and stairways. So, and I want to follow whatever protocol. I can see some.
What you're comfortable with.
You'll hear
I
me
would
a
say
little
that we do have to hear also just from two other witnesses,
Yep.
so we're trying to keep people about
Okay.
5 minutes.
Okay. So, and I know that some of this I will try not to be duplicative.
Thank you.
And I know you've heard
Thank you.
about some of these topics before today. Anyway, my name is Jeannie Albert, and I'm a resident of Lincoln. And I have a long time professor of mathematics in schools in the area, starting at Dartmouth, where I did my graduate work, but also at Castleton State College, now university, where I had the pleasure of working with many future teachers, some of whom didn't know they were going to be future teachers, and so that was always a pleasure. And most recently at Middlebury College. And I'm also a member of the Safe Community Schools organization from Lincoln, and so I worked with them quite a bit on quantitative analysis, financial analysis, and other things. And all of those experiences have informed, what I want to share with you today. But in addition, just concerned citizen. And I do have copies of this. I sent it. It's a 2-page. I don't know what the protocol is, but if you have it, but I have actual paper copies. Some people are like that. I tried to pick out 4 items, again, some of which I'll try to be very, especially quick because it sounds like you maybe already discussed them a little bit today, that I wanted to highlight. The first is something I've heard through, I've been watching a lot of the witness testimony and listening to the conversations. And one thing that comes up frequently is the idea of designing the new withdrawal processes as somehow parallel to the merger process. That is a way of kind of conceptualizing why some of those changes were made. And I would invite you to maybe think of a better analogy. Thinking about it quite a bit, it occurred to me that a better parallel, if that was helpful, would be between a merger, establishment of a merger and a dissolution of a merger. Those two seem more parallel. And in fact, even some of what I think is in H727, the new withdrawal language, fits a little bit with that, in my view. I won't go too far into it because I want to get to some other things. I'm suggesting the better parallel would be, again, to the extent that it's helpful, would be between joining an existing district and leaving an existing district. In large part, the difference or the mismatch, I think, just comes from the idea that a merger really is a new entity. Obviously, there are variations in the types of mergers, but often it's really creating something completely new, very complicated potentially, lots of choices to make, lots of analysis to make. So that isn't to say that when you're leaving a district, there aren't important other things to do, but they're not, I would say the complexity is quite different and potential complexity is quite different. So that was the first thing I thought I would just mention because I hadn't heard a discussion about that. The second has been brought up quite a few times, just in the last, Tim was bringing up, about the session law for withdrawals underway, and that it's really not an exemption or carve out. The only thing I'll add to, I think, what you already heard is that the requirements really are nearly identical with respect to the report and plan that's in the new section 724. And so just to the extent that it really isn't just, because you hear people say, oh, you just kind of just keep going on your own path and then you'll be done. But that's really not quite right. It is really added requirements, added law, and I was quite a lot involved in the information sessions for voters, making sure they had good information about a number of things, but in particular, the reliance, as you were just hearing, on the current law. That's what they expected they were voting on at the time. So because I've heard you say problems and solutions.
I like this a lot. No, I
So
like
I
this a
thought,
lot.
well, that's what they,
You see this?
aim to please.
Well, you
So,
I'm kidding.
He
did a very
one-sentence
good job as well.
recommendation
I
that
have,
Great job.
there are some skills you pick up teaching, so in any case, these are just suggestions. I mean, if you want a sort of true grandmothering, that's what I decided I wanted to call it.
Sure.
Then I think there are opportunities to do that as long as you do it with care. I know Stowe has some important things they want. Not that I've talked to them, I'm not representing anything, but so I think there's ways to do that in a reasonable way. I know Herb Olson came in and had some ideas, but so I'm going to turn it over now to the other side. So the last two are two sides. The commingling issue comes up here as well, but in a very specific area. So this was another item that I saw, again, come up in discussion that I think fits within the frame of sort of a risk for anti-democratic outcomes. That's kind of the way I like to think of it. And it involves situations where, and this is, I assume is a lot of the reason for the rewrite, is that you now have many districts that are themselves union districts that want to potentially merge with other districts, which is in fact happening with our own district. I refer to it as second level merger, that's just my own term, but the two items I pulled out in that context are the situation we had voter approved articles of agreement. These were ones that specifically were on the ballot. I know there's a distinction between ones that are or referred to by reference. That current law says, and in the new H727, only the voters can amend. But at the same time, but that doesn't actually mean that the merger study committee ever has to bring them up or remind people of that. Or now there are members of that committee that presumably could do that, but there's no requirement for the voters to really understand what they are giving up, and that I find bothersome. I get that there's going to be a new entity, and they may want to adopt new articles of agreement, and maybe that makes sense. I think there ought to be at least an opportunity for the voters. I mean, I think my sense is it really seems required that they have to actively rescind them or repeal them. At a minimum, they should be aware that that's what they're doing by entering into a new merged district. And then the second half of this issue of a second level merger, where you have one district that's, or at least one that's itself a union, is this issue of the commingling. So I'll come back to this. So I think that there's probably a case to be made that in the operation of the district, that there's reasons to have commingled votes, maybe, you know, I mean, I think you can disagree about that, but like, maybe it is appropriate that the budgets are voted in a commingled way, or other types of votes. But when you are actually, when this entity, new entity, is voting to become yet another new entity, or part of a new entity, I feel that there's, it would be better to preserve the individual town vote. I think it advances a sense of that the members are not just dissolved; they are entities, they're towns. And then the issue of the numbers. So you know, of course, that was what stuck out to me. It's not that difficult for to have a situation where you have several towns in a union district that are roughly the same size, not necessarily tiny, but just roughly, and then another one that's sufficiently larger that a vote to merge can pass with only that one town, even though all the others disapprove. And that feels wrong. Like, I feel like that would, now, of course, they wouldn't necessarily know it because it's commingled, but the truth is that that really could take place. And again, not with some, it could be like a, not even 60-40, less dramatic than that. So I have a couple of suggestions about that. And that's what I have for you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Questions?
You know Sally and Dan over.
Please.
Oh, yes. So do I,
Okay.
since they were a big.
Oh.
Baseball coach.
Huh?
Dan.
Yep.
So our plan from here will be tomorrow, we'll start to kind of find what direction committee members want to go in, but this is very helpful.
And obviously, anything that becomes less clear, that's what my students always tell me. I understood it great when you were in the class, and then later. I used, for many years, I lived in Sudbury, by the way, so I was in Rutland County, and I do recall your name.
Senator Chinman.
Had my opportunity.
Just so you
Yes,
know,
right.
I'm gonna advocate to give the communities the option to commingle or not necessarily to force them to not commingle or to
Right.
not do so, but I just think it makes sense to allow the districts to decide what makes the most sense for them.
I've heard some of the comments you made, and I thought it makes sense to me, but again, I'm particularly focused on this, in particular, this one issue, but I appreciate that, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the committee feels as though, you know, a version of 727 needs to leave this year, can probably leave next week. There was a lot of work just in terms of corrections and editing and those first sections. Yeah, chunk one at least needs to go. And the big question, as you know, is what to do with these kinds of situations. And we'll work on that in the coming days.
Well, I do appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah,
It was
no,
good to see
thank you,
Thank you.
thank you. And please feel free if you want to stay and listen to the other testimony or. Okay.
Should I not leave the copies?
Yeah, that'd be great. You can leave them with Daphne. That'd be terrific.
I did leave a list just because the senator
Yes.
was noting, it's called the ask, and it sort of incorporates some of the solutions to some of the problems I've identified. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Ms. McLean, thank you for joining us. I'm afraid we are short on time. One of the things that you might consider doing is talking about things that you may agree or disagree. I mean, we're really looking for, we've heard a lot, you know, as you can imagine, from your region, your neck of the woods, and now we are just eager to hear new information. If you have new information to share.
I have new information. It's more of a statewide perspective. My name is Margaret McLean. I'm from Peacham. I'm a past member of the Vermont State Board of Education and an employee of the Rural School and Community Trust, the national advocacy organization for rural schools. Since 2014, I've volunteered as a moderator of a Google group, Vermonters for Schools and Communities, in which about 250 Vermonters participate. At first, it was very much focused on Act 46. Now it's more focused on withdrawal. The data I'm going to present has been reported by folks from that Google group and cross-checked in local press and information. So in making changes to longstanding law, it's important to look at how current law is working or not working and consider how the changes impact the opportunity of regular Vermonters to participate. So thank you for your work, and I'm specifically speaking to the withdrawal section. I've actually got some good news to report, that local democracy is working and that current law is working and needs a few tweaks. So numerous towns, and I have an informal list I haven't attached, but I could, have used democratic processes to petition, discuss, and vote on issues related to Act 46. These towns demonstrate how important citizen involvement is in town governance, and those processes are effectively embedded in current law. Towns have voted to change articles of agreement to reassure citizens on issues such as repurposing of school buildings and school closure. Examples include Wyndham Southeast Supervisory Union in the southeast of the state and Missisquoi Valley Supervisory District in the northwest of the state. Over 90% of merged districts have adjusted articles of agreement to include safeguards to schools, which has reassured Vermonters. Of the towns who have voted to withdraw or dissolve mergers, more towns have subsequently voted not to proceed than have voted to proceed. An example are the towns of Newbury and Bradford. They were forced into merger. They didn't voluntarily merge, and Newbury citizens had a number of concerns. They petitioned to change articles of agreement, and the articles of agreement were changed. That satisfied some folks. It didn't satisfy others. They were concerned about assumption of debt from the other town, and they petitioned to withdraw. The petition to withdraw was unsuccessful at the ballot box. Current law works. It results in a variety of outcomes, as it should. Districts who have voted to change articles of agreement and districts three towns have withdrawn. I believe you've heard from folks, Halifax, Reedsboro, and Westminster, and a small group who you are hearing from, Lincoln, Ripon, Stoughton, Stocksboro, are in process. But the folks you've heard from are the folks who are in process. There's a lot of people out there who have resolved this democratically. In making changes to the law, the State Board of Ed and the House Education Committee have focused on the town of Ripon and the issues that Ripon have raised as the rationale for change. What's interesting is that two opportunities afforded other towns have been denied in Ripon. Lost opportunity number one was when Ripon citizens gathered over 800 signatures from all 6 towns in their merged district, asking Addison Central Supervisory District to discuss and vote on changes to articles of agreement. That petition was denied by the ACSD board and no action was taken. ACSD is an outlier by this action, not an example of what has been typical statewide. Lost opportunity number 2 was when all the towns, Middlebury, Weybridge, Cornwall, Bridport, Shoreham, and Salisbury, voted by wide margins, 79%, to approve Ripon's vote to leave. That vote sent a message, but rather than letting the vote resolve this issue of withdrawal, the ACSD board subsequently refused to act as a supervisory union for Ripon. Now, in Vermont, numerous other districts are a mix of merged and unmerged groups. There are 50 single town school districts that still exist in Vermont. They all work in supervisory unions. I think the most parallel example is Wyndham Southeast. It represents Putney, Dummerston, Guilford, and Brattleboro, who were forced into merger, and it operates as a supervisory union with Vernon, which was left because it operated differently as a single town school district. On this, when it's common practice for merged districts and unmerged districts to work together in a supervisory union. And on this issue, ASCD is again an outlier. No other administrative structure in Vermont has refused tax dollars to serve a town school district. It begs the question, is Who is meant to serve who? Is the administrative structure exists in service of the towns? Or is it telling the towns what it will and won't do? So regardless of the outcome, remaining merged or dissolving a merger, current law, including this healthy dose of democratic agency on the part of citizens, is showing it's working. But current law only works if the democratic opportunities it affords are accessible to the electorate. Had those lost opportunities been explored by Addison Central, Ripton would most likely have chosen to remain merged. Or they would be effectively operating Addison Central as a supervisory union. Instead, they're now the impetus for the revision of the withdrawal section of Title 16, Chapter 11. This one example. When it comes to withdrawal, Ripton is the exception, not the rule. ASCD's actions are outliers. In Vermont, we predominantly, after Act 46 was resolved, we have predominantly seen examples of collaboration taking place, consensus being built. You probably know districts who've done this, resolving issues that were outstanding, changing articles to make people feel more comfortable with the new environment they're working in. That didn't happen at ACSD. So I won't go into all the issues. I listed them in my written testimony, and they've been mentioned, I think, many times to you. But the inescapable conclusion is that this is the process designed to fail. It's a withdrawal process in name only, a withdrawal process that's currently a daunting task, including countless volunteer hours, becomes an inaccessible process for regular Vermonters to participate in. It's a fail-fail situation. Why have a withdrawal process if you can't withdraw? A comprehensive report of how current law is working, including districts who've changed articles, towns who have voted not to withdraw, would give the committee a full picture of what's going on in Vermont, rather than changes to a law based on one outlying example. This testimony shows that the basis of H727 is rocky. It's overkill and not proportionate to the issues at hand. Changes should build on current law, and the amendment presented by Herb Olson yesterday is the great place to start with making those changes. Thank you for your time.
Questions for Ms. McLean. Mr. Forlenza, we will reschedule you. We are losing committee members, and Ms. McLean did not stick to the 5-minute rule, I'm afraid, not even close. So I apologize, but we will have to reschedule you for tomorrow. We're getting very close to ending the session, and I have to say our time is very limited at this point. Committee, questions for Ms. McLean? Questions for our other witnesses before we move on?
Just a comment.
Please.
I would like to take a close look at Mr. Olson's second option that he presented, the carve out Starksboro. I think there was some merit in at least evaluating it as a committee if there's time.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, Ms. McLean, thank you. Mr. Forlenza, Daphne will be in contact. Thank you both. Apologize, it's crunch time. This is very helpful.
Thank you for all the time.
Yeah.
Thank you. Daphne, if you would take us offline.